You're listening to Damascus Radio, the broadcasting service of the Syrian Arab Republic, and now stay tuned for the news. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Damascus Radio, and it's time for our news for tonight, read jointly by Randa Qadoura and Basim Bagdash. In our bulletin for tonight, President Bashar al-Assad asserted that the Syrian Arab Army was built on the basis of traditional war, so it will suffer no harm by giving up the chemical weapons. In an interview with the Chinese TV station CCTV, the president asserted that Syria called upon the UN Security Council 10 years ago to empty this region of all mass destruction weapons. The president said Syria would get nothing for giving up the chemical weapons cooperation with Russia, continued in order to consolidate the Syrian arsenal, particularly in the field of air defenses, because the Zionist entity continued to occupy Syrian lands. Prime Minister Dr. Wael Halaqi called upon the various departments and ministries to take the necessary measures to rationalize current and investment expenditure and to complete the projects that have a significant economic value, particularly in the ministries of trade, consumer protection, agriculture, electricity, oil, the health sector, the mills, and the gas stations. In the meeting of the Higher Council of Socio-Economic Planning, he discussed the efforts to prepare the general budget of the year 2014. Dr. Al-Halaqi called upon the ministries to exert more efforts to provide citizens with all the basic necessities of life that would strengthen their steadfastness against the American Zionist plots targeting Syria. He pointed out that the national economy faced many difficulties and challenges under the unjust siege, foreign sanctions, and sabotage activities at the hands of the terrorist gangs. This made it urgent for everybody to work as a united team to overcome these challenges and to complete the process of construction and stability. The security forces captured large quantities of drugs and explosive devices hidden in a vehicle at the entry to Homs. The captured things included narcotic pills, night binoculars, and various types of ammunition in the Suzuki vehicle before it entered Homs. A unit of our armed forces killed 9 terrorists in Al-Ghajr village in a Restan countryside. Another unit destroyed an anti-aircraft gun and a terrorist hideout in Zafarani, and 5 other hideouts were also destroyed, and the terrorists hiding in them were killed and wounded. A unit of our valiant army clashed with terrorist groups in Jurt al-Shayyah, killing most of them. The army also confronted terrorist gangs trying to attack some villages in the area, killing and wounding most of them. Randa?
In appreciation of the martyrs' sacrifices in defending the homeland, the Syrian Association for Supporting Martyrs' Families honored 600 martyrs' families from Suwaida. Governor of Suwaida, Atif al-Naddaf, stressed that martyrdom is the most sublime value, affirming that Syria will come out victorious of its ordeal thanks to its people's awareness and the army's sacrifices. For her part, chairperson of the association's board of directors, Hala Shawi, pointed out that this activity aimed to express gratitude to the martyrs who sacrificed their souls to preserve Syria's dignity and sovereignty. The martyrs' families expressed pride in their sons' sacrifices in defending Syria, affirming their readiness for martyrdom for the sake of restoring security and stability to the country. Hama Governor Ghassan Khalaf and head of the International Committee of the Red Cross Mission in Damascus, Megan Bath, discussed cooperation in the efforts to reduce the effects of the drinking water shortage in the cities of Hama and Al-Salamiyah. Khalaf said that the governorate allocated a large part of its budget to carry out water projects, voicing readiness to launch new projects in this field. He also lauded the efforts exerted by the ICRC and the Syrian Arab Red Crescent in providing generators for wells to provide water for several neighborhoods in Hama. In his turn, Baath stressed the need to coordinate efforts and rally forces to deal with urgent situations and alleviate citizens' suffering, affirming that the ICRC will spare no effort to provide drinking water in Hama. For his part, Director of SARS branch in Hama, Fadi Ayyash, reviewed the water and environmental projects in the two cities and upcoming plans to put more wells into service and installing reservoirs. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov announced that the Organization of Collective Security supports the efforts of the international community to solve the crisis in Syria. Addressing the meeting of the foreign ministers of the member countries in this organization, he said Russia was concerned about the situation in Syria and its negative impact on the whole region and on international law. He stressed the necessity to accelerate the efforts to solve the problem of chemical weapons. This would support the endeavors of the international community concerning Syria. The US is trying to blackmail Russia and the world by forcing its upside-down Syria peace scenario on the international community, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in an interview to the country's main TV channel, Channel 1, according to Voice of Russia. The foreign chief accused Washington of excessively politicking the crisis in Syria. He said the US was using the civil war in the Middle East to assert its supremacy in order to make the region dance to their tune. Mr. Lavrov stressed this approach had nothing to do with the long overdue peace process and the Russia-backed plan to take away chemical weapons from the Syrian government. The foreign minister called on the US to come to terms with the fact that the world had become polycentric and it was not good forcing America's opinions onto it.
China says the international community should reach a compromise on chemical weapons in Syria as soon as possible. More details are in this following report.
Mr. Yang Yi has said that it is important for the international community to reach a compromise regarding the chemical weapons in Syria as soon as possible. Meeting the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon in New York on Sunday, Wang stressed that the international community should get rid of these weapons and find a solution for the crisis equivalently. Xinhua, the Chinese news agency, quoted Wang as saying that China supports the Organization for Prohibition of the Chemical Weapons to perform its job objectively, honestly, and professionally. The Chinese foreign minister expressed his country's readiness to send experts to participate in the inspection and destruction process of the chemical weapons in Syria. Earlier, the Chinese Foreign Ministry stressed that the Russian initiative on the chemical weapons in Syria is positive and constructive, and it gives a move forward to find a solution to the crisis in Syria. The Chinese Foreign Minister pays a two-day visit to the U.S. to take part in the 28th session of the UN General Assembly.
After more than 2 years of supporting terrorists in Syria, Erdogan's government admitted that terrorists infiltrated into Turkish lands from Syria. President Abdullah Gül expressed a grave concern about this in the meetings of the UN General Assembly, while he attempted to wriggle out of his government's responsibility for facilitating terrorist acts in Syria. Now, however, he resorted to the pretext that it is very difficult for Turkey to stop these terrorists because its borders with Syria are more than 900 kilometers long. The National Union of Syrian Students Armenia branch, in cooperation with the Syrian community in Armenia, organized a sit-in in support of Syria against the U.S. threats and terrorism in front of the UN headquarters in Armenia's capital, Yerevan. The participants expressed their rejection of terrorism and foreign intervention in Syria, voicing support of Syria's people and army in the face of the aggression funded by the US, France, UK, Turkey, and some Gulf countries. Chanting the Syrian anthem and national slogans, the participants hailed the firmness of the Syrian Arab army in confronting the terrorists and defending the homeland. Back to you, Randa.
Thank you, Bassem. Maronite Patriarch Bishara Boutros Arrahi affirmed that we pray to God, along with Pope Francis of the Vatican, for the political security, stability in Lebanon, peace in Syria, Egypt and Iraq. Cardinal Arrahi said, we pray to God for solving the pending conflicts through dialogue, negotiations and approachment, away from violence or wars. He added that the Middle East countries torn by political conflicts and wars witness mounting extremist groups which are hostile to Christianity without any reason, but because these groups are Takfiri movements. The military wing of the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, Fatah al-Intifada, has claimed responsibility for the operation carried out yesterday in Hebron city and resulted in the killing of an Israeli soldier and the injury of 4 others. In a statement, the military wing clarified that the members who carried out the operation returned safely. As a result, settlers attacked a Rumeida neighborhood in the Old Town in Hebron, and the occupation forces imposed full blockade on it. And in Iran, Brigadier Hossein Dahkan, Iran's foreign minister, asserted that Iran would never join negotiations about its nuclear file as a weak party. He affirmed that Iran would never accept any preconditions and threats. He said Iran's foreign policy was based on dignity, wisdom, and national interests. These principles in Iran's foreign relations would never change. He said that developments in the region and the world during the past few years had given America and its allies lessons that the harm of war would be much larger than its benefits.
And also in Iran, Iranian experts will receive the temporary operational control of the Bushehr nuclear power plant from the Russian contractor after signing a relevant protocol. Head of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, Ali Akbar Salehi, Iranian Energy Minister Hamid Chichian, and the head of the Russian contractor company are to participate in the ceremony of delivering the temporary control of the Bushehr nuclear power plant. The protocol for the power plant's temporary delivery will also be signed on the same day, the report added. Late in August, head of the Bushehr nuclear power plant, Hossein Darakhanda, announced the Bushehr power plant is now in the operational phase to produce safe and secure electricity. He said, once the control of the Bushehr nuclear power plant is delivered to the Iranian experts in the next 2 months, the plant will start industrial operation phase. The Russian official underlined that Bushehr nuclear power plant is currently operating at 100% capacity and the process of preparing it for transfer to the project originator, Iran, is concluding. The Islamic Republic signed the Bushehr contract with Russia in the year 1995, and the nuclear power plant reached its full capacity by August 2012. The Bushehr nuclear power plant is located about 18 kilometers south of the provincial capital. And now over to the final item, ladies and gentlemen, that says Turkish Parliament Speaker Cemil Çiçek, in a meeting with his Iranian counterpart Ali Larijani in Tehran, strongly condemned the Takfiri terrorists' continued brutalities against the innocent people in Syria and called for the peaceful settlement of the crisis in Syria as soon as possible. The Turkish speaker said, late, that the crimes committed by the Takfiri terrorists in Syria and other extremists in the region are against Islam, human principles, and human rights. Both Iranian and Turkish speakers vowed to try their best to encourage all sides involved in the Syrian crisis to participate in a comprehensive national dialogue to end the bloodshed in the Muslim country. Chichek arrived in Tehran at the head of a high-ranking parliamentary delegation to confer with his Iranian counterpart Ali Larijani and Iran's President Hassan Rouhani ways to bolster Tehran-Ankara relations as well as the recent developments in the region, specifically the crisis in Syria. Chichek criticized certain Western states for their double-standard policies towards terrorism in various countries, particularly in Syria. The Turkish speaker condemned the double-standard stances of the West toward Syria and slammed terrorist acts in the country. And with that last item, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude our news for tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. Damascus Radio presents News and Views.
Good evening, dear listeners, to all of you. The EU's among Arabs and heated competitions and pilgrimages to world capitals. In France, the Foreign Minister of Qatar has ended his meetings with the French officials. The Saudi Foreign Minister enters for talks with top French officials. The focus of talks for both foreign ministers is mainly the ongoing in Egypt, not to mention their antagonism and hatred to Syrians and to their resistance and steadfastness. The Qataris, along with their Al Jazeera, their machine of lies, fabrications and slaughter, want an EU condemnation of what they view in Egypt as co-dictate against their handmade Morsi, for whom they wasted millions of petrodollars. The Qatari, along with their Turkish partners in Muslim Brotherhood's slaughter and blasphemy, were caught in a dilemma. They couldn't believe that their sinister Takfiri scheme to dereg on was crushed when more than 30 million Egyptians took to the streets and deposed the wanted for justice Morsi. The Saudis, the main arms supplier, backer and financer of the Takfiri Wahhabi terrorists in Syria, want but an urgent and for Muslim Brotherhood's terrorism in Egypt. As much as the Saudi officials are keen on the killing of Syrians, they are keen on ending the killing of Egyptians by the same Takfiri terrorist groups. In both cases of Saudi Arabia and Qatar, the goal is but one, as to compensate for their losing gambles in Syria. An observer can't but to wonder whether the Saudi-Qatari fierce competition has anything to do with humanity, fraternity, or even with the egoist and selfish interests of both satellite countries. Definitely, the Syrians are keen on the blood of their brethren in the north part of the United Arab Republic, as much as they are keen on their blood. Egypt's national role is much more needed nowadays more than any other time. The majority does aspire to a balanced pan-Arab nationalist role by Egypt as to save the remaining part of Arabs' identity, honor, and dignity.
That was News and Views from Damascus Radio. Damascus Radio presents Syrian Local Press Review.
Hello, dear listeners, to all of you. Today's newspapers issued in Damascus give high prominence to the following headings. Prime Minister Dr. Wael al-Halqi instructed the ministers and public institutions to rationalize and adjust the current and investment expenditure, stressing the importance of carrying through with the projects of big economic feasibility that have a completion percentage of 60%. Al-Halqi called on ministers to double the efforts to provide the citizens' needs so as to be able to square up to the conspiracies targeting Syria. A third expanded meeting of the High Commission for Syria Relief with representatives of relevant UN organizations focused on the challenges facing relief work in Syria in the framework of the humanitarian response plan signed between both sides. Minister of Social Affairs Kinda Al-Shammat highlighted during the meeting the importance of overcoming all difficulties hindering the implementation of the response plans program, as well as tackling the issue of funding. A citizen was injured in a mortar attack fired by terrorists on the residential area of Al-Mazra'ah in Damascus. 2 citizens were injured by a mortar shell fired by terrorists on citizen houses in the town of Jaramana in Damascus countryside. A source of the Russian embassy said a mortar shell landed in the compound of the Russian embassy in Damascus without causing any casualties. The source stressed that no one was hurt and that work at the embassy is proceeding normally. The army units continued operations against terrorist groups, which resulted in the destruction of a car bomb and the discovery of tunnels and seizing a car loaded with C4 and Captagon pills, besides killing many terrorists. Units of the armed forces killed and injured several terrorists in Damascus countryside, some of them affiliated to the so-called Al-Islam Brigade and Jabhat al-Nusra, in addition to destroying their weapons and equipment. A unit of the Syrian Arab Army foiled a terrorist attempt to detonate a car bomb in the industry city in Al-Nabak, Damascus countryside. Authorities seized a car loaded with large amounts of explosive material and narcotic substances in Homs. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov described the West's attempts to seek politicized draft UN Security Council resolutions against Syria as irresponsible and unprofessional. Lavrov accused the Western countries of being less interested in the disposal of the chemical weapons in Syria than in trying to exploit the Russian-US agreement so as to carry out what Russia and China have blocked them from doing, namely adopting a resolution involving using force against the Syrian regime and shielding the opposition. Lavrov stressed that parallel to the work of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons experts, those who are funding the opposition groups, particularly the extremists, should find a way to demand that these groups hand over what they have seized so as to be destroyed according to the CWC. Lavrov expressed Russia's readiness to send military personnel and policemen to Syria to ensure the safety of the UN chemical weapons experts. Former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark stressed that the American people strongly oppose the war and direct military aggression against Syria. In its editorial, Al-Thawra writes about war in Syria as quoting the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, who said all countries should devote their efforts to stop the war in Syria and stop supporting the armed terrorist groups. He stressed the necessity of the Syrian opposition to have a dialogue with the Syrian government. He pointed out that Iran and its armed forces are a factor for realizing peace in the region.
That was a review of the Syrian local press issued in Damascus this morning. Here is a final look at the news summary. President Bashar al-Assad asserts that the Syrian Arab army was built on the basis of traditional war. Prime Minister Dr. Wael Halaqi calls upon the various departments and ministries to take the necessary measures to rationalize current and investment expenditure. The Syrian Association for Supporting Martyrs' Families honors 600 martyrs' families from Suwaida. Hama Governor Ghassan Khalaf and head of the International Committee of the Red Cross Mission in Damascus discussed cooperation in the efforts to reduce the effects of the drinking water shortage in the cities of Hama and As-Salamiyeh. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov announces that the Organization of Collective Security supports the efforts of the international community to solve the crisis in Syria. And China says the international community should reach a compromise on chemical weapons in Syria as soon as possible. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of our transmission for tonight. Until we meet again tomorrow at the same time and on the same frequencies, we wish you all the best from Damascus Radio, the broadcasting service of the Syrian Arab Republic. Good night.